Okay, we are recording, so be aware of that. All right. So this is our last class before the final. I just put up an announcement in Blackboard just about a half an hour ago that um, I'm going to have the final exam available no later than 6 p.m. next Wednesday, and I'm going to try to get it open for you earlier in the week so that you have more time to do it. Hopefully it won't take you, I don't imagine it would take you a tremendous amount of time, but depending on your schedule. And it'll be due finished no later than midnight Friday of next week. That's December 18th. And then I have to have grades done and submitted for the class early the following week. So I can't really have it last any longer than Friday since I'll have to be busy doing that on the weekend. And I'm going to review the final. The final will focus on the 20th century. So what we've done the last few meetings, and tonight I'm going to talk about some of the most recent stuff. I've got some information about the architect Frank Gehry, who was and also designed furniture, kind of like more as a novelty project, but he made some kind of interesting postmodern furniture. And he is also an architect who really pushed the limit of what architecture can be, what the process is. He's someone who starts with like a sketch, like a really wiry, scribbly sketch, and then he designs off of that. And it usually, his architecture sometimes looks like it. I've also brought up some websites of some contemporary designers, architects, who are people you should, won't hurt you to know who they are or who they were in one case, because Zaha Hadid has passed away 4 years ago. She was young. She was only 56 when she died, but someone who's definitely worth knowing. So the vocabulary cards are the discussion board is open for those. And have any of you had any trouble getting to the discussion board?
No.
If you do, you can take pictures and send them to me by email. I'd prefer to have them in the discussion board so they are, so that they are posted someplace that is very specific for the assignment. Okay, any other questions? No. Good. All right. Well, let's bring up. No, not that one. That one. Let's share my screen. All right. Let's do full screen there. There we go. So this is part of a presentation on deconstruction. I think it's maybe officially titled Deconstruction and POMO, which is short for Postmodern. So that's Frank Gehry when he was younger. He's about 90 years old now. Still going, still causing trouble in the architecture world. But that is him sitting in a chair. It was called Easy Edges. It is made of corrugated cardboard. This is his home in Santa Monica, California, that he took this existing house and built outward by just adding architectural elements that would, so like some of the, um, like this kitchen, you can see the interior wall of his kitchen is the old exterior wall. And he just pushed it out and added these skylights, added the beams. And so tell me what you think about that. Like, if this, would you do this for your own home?
I think the kitchen is beautiful and it kind of looks like a Four Seasons room, but the outside from this photo, this perspective, is not doing it for me.
Mm-hmm. His neighbors felt.
The
That's how his neighbors felt.
I think they had a lot of objections.
I think
for
it's
sure.
the fence that is really throwing me off.
Yeah.
It just looks unfinished. It looks like it's under construction, but actually, you know, the inside is cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So I saw an interview with him where he was talking about, like why he did this. Like, I mean, partly like this is without the old house. This is kind of the kind of architecture he was doing in the 70s, where with this corrugated, like simple, almost like monopoly houses, really simple. Like these, you know, there's some of the I've seen some of his like architecture from that era that looks kind of like a big toy house. And this idea of just stripping away, like making almost like a symbolic house. But he's using corrugated metal, plywood, and chain link fence for as not just to build with, but also as more as aesthetic elements. And he was talking about like using chain link, and excuse me, he said everybody hates chain link, including me. He said, but I put a little chain link up here, and everybody has a problem with it. And he said, I think it's really about denial, because chain link is something that our civilization uses just vast amounts of chain link, but everybody says they hate it. And so he wanted to sort of poke everybody with like, if we hate this, why do we use so much of it? And so his challenge is either find something better to use, or maybe we could start to see this as beautiful. And some people
That's really cool and interesting.
It's a good point. I mean, it's not like he was just like I'm going to make my house look really crappy, just because. I mean, he wasn't that hostile toward his neighbors.
I would really like if the whole house was that metal, I think. And even with the chain link, I feel like it would look good if the whole thing was that metal.
Yeah, I think the contrast, I mean, it doesn't really go with the old house.
Mm-mm.
And, I think I think some, architects will do this where they buy a house and they use it as a laboratory. And they just do kind of whatever, and just like no one can stop him from trying these things out. He doesn't have a client to make happy other than himself. So like this, like this, in some respects, if you're looking for some nice finished architecture, this looks like crap. But he wanted to see, architects, after modernism, a lot of architects started to look at all the things that modernism said, you can't do it, or it's ugly. This is like this exposed plywood is like the wrought iron structure that was used for train stations that initially would never have been used for anything considered finished or beautiful. But yeah, this kitchen is great, isn't it? Just want to spend all day in there. And I really like seeing like the old exterior wall is an interior wall. And here is living area. And you see like the beams, I kind of like the beams. The exposed, like the lath where there would have been plaster. That's kind of interesting. You can see some of his cardboard, like there's a cardboard ottoman in the corner there. It's interesting. It's with some of work when you see people who are really trying to push a boundary, like just like come up with something new. They often make things that are. I would say that they're interesting, but I don't know if I'm ready to say it's good. But that's the artist in him. Frank Gehry is more of an artist. Now, that is one of his easy edges chairs, which actually go back to the 60s.
Charlie, they used to be home.
What's that?
I'm sorry, I thought I was muted. I was talking to my dog.
That understand. But like, what is that? What do you think of this chair?
It's very interesting. It's definitely a statement. Not particularly something that you would be able to sit in for a long time, but it's very interesting for sure.
Do you know the scale of this? Like I'm having a hard time understanding how big it is because the back looks like it'd be really short or it's really tall.
Yeah, I think it's a fairly small chair.
Okay.
I don't think it's the kind of chair like you. I mean, yeah, it looks like it might be something you have to climb up into.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just a small chair.
Okay. That is really interesting. I mean, I don't know. I could see it somewhere like in the city, in a building in the city somewhere.
Yeah.
It's
And it's
very unique looking and kind of modern.
Mm-hmm. It's a bit of a novelty chair. It's I mean you might even think of it as something like either functional sculpture, or conceptual furniture. And here is another. This is a little beaver chair. That I couldn't, I have not ever sat in one of these chairs, so I couldn't tell you if it is or is not comfortable. But I can feel the scratchiness of the cardboard without even sitting in it. That, and I guess you got to be wearing jeans and a heavy shirt or something. But I think it's a really interesting idea to make this thing that looks like a sculpture. Fish lamps. He had his thing for using the form of a fish in his early in his architecture, from in the 80s and the 90s, like that. Which is really just a large. I mean, it's more of like a large sculpture on a building from Olympic Village. As the Olympics were in Barcelona in '92. And here at the Vitra Design Museum, which is very close to Switzerland. It's like southern Germany. So if you look at the grouping of the buildings, or just like what he does with the building, it looks very sculptural. Now his buildings are pretty well known for having, not all of them, but a lot of them have problems with leaking, like water damage, and it's just because he creates these really unusual edges and connect, like just like the way different things connect. It's challenging to build it. And when I was in graduate school at the University of Iowa, they built a Frank Gehry building right across the river from the art building, and it looked a lot like this. And it's really, I mean, it's almost like people would refer to it as the Emerald City, because it did look kind of like something from some fantasy, or So, but he was really interested in coming up with architecture that really seems to have a lot of energy to it when it's finished. So like there are a lot of curves and these like sharp angles that create like really something that's more visually stimulating. And then here, this is a museum for design, and so there's a lot of furniture classics in there. The chair in the foreground is by Werner Penton, which is another classic. I don't think we've talked about that. It's just this single piece molded plastic. But you can see there's a Tonnet chair, Barcelona chair, Gerrit Rietveld, a couple of Mies chairs. Oh, there's like that's the Vasily chair, and then there's the Mies chair. This is it's kind of this signature building. Have any of you heard of this? The Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao in Spain?
No.
Well,
Yes.
so this is a lot of what I think, he's designed some other museums, and it's really like people would say that the architecture overwhelms the art, and it's like the art. It's really more about the architecture and like the artwork is kind of like takes a back seat to the architecture, but some contemporary.
Isn't architecture art too, though, technically?
Yes, very good point.
Or it can be?
Yes, no, I think I think it should be thought of. Architecture doesn't have to just be this utilitarian thing, and that's when we design and redesign things, we don't really need to do that, but we want novelty, and so we have to keep coming up with new ways to solve the problem of what is a chair, what is a building, what's it look like, what's it feel like. So some artists would say, if my artwork can't stand up to the building, maybe it shouldn't be there. Which I think I like that as a point about it. And he creates architecture that's meant to be a visual experience. And then you go into it. There's a nice street scene with a. You see that big sculpture is by the artist Jeff Koons. It's a giant terrier, and it's planted with flowers. And when they all blossom, you get this giant terrier covered in flowers. It's kind of adorable. But it's meant to be this experience. Here is a entry, the main entry to it, and it's chaotic, which some people don't particularly care for, and other people love it. I mean, he really seems to love bending surfaces. And I know that he does study models where he takes paper and uses it and just folds it, bends it, and just tries to figure out what's interesting. And there's a view of the interior of the atrium. And in my opinion, not very good sculpture. But I think in this case, the architecture is just more interesting than the artwork. And the steel, this curving steel sculpture by a guy named Richard Serra, who's a pretty good friend of Frank Gehry's. I think Richard Serra is no longer alive, but he, there are these great big curving steel planes, which that's artwork that I think can stand up to the museum. But if looking at this, this space in this museum, there's a lot going on, and that's all intentional.
This particular sculpture definitely complements the exterior, the architecture.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was going to add.
Go ahead.
Sorry. I was just going to add, I don't think that the architecture necessarily has to take away from the art. It just, there needs to be certain pieces of art that go along with the architecture. I think they can complement each other as long as they're the right pieces. That
is an excellent point, and I agree with you. You can't just put anything in this museum. It's got to be I think that the museum challenges the artwork to keep up, and that's there's
I agree.
Another architect is more of a late modernist named I.M. Pei. Have you heard of I.M. Pei?
I have not.
He is he designed a lot of really nice museums. There's an addition he designed to the Des Moines Art Center, but I think it was in the 50s or 60s. I think it's in the 60s. And it's similar to this museum in that it's just really, I.M. Pei worked at a certain period in his career with concrete. And so this addition by I.M. Pei is all concrete. And it's really beautifully done, but it's kind of your warm gray and massive. And there's this main room with sculpture in it, and most of the work just looks tiny compared to the architecture. The architecture diminishes a lot of the work when it's in this big room. And there are just a few pieces that there's this one gigantic pop art piece that's made of blue naugahyde, and it's really large, and it just holds its own in the space. And so I think it's an important, the interior design of a museum needs to be, needs to be able to display the artwork clearly. And, there are galleries in this museum that are smaller, box galleries for some, for simpler, two-dimensional work. Okay. So here's another, cafeteria at Condé Nast in New York City. Second, I just had something shift off on my wall. Okay. How about that? Look at that interior design.
Is that plexiglass?
No, that's glass.
Oh, it's just glass.
Yeah.
Okay.
Probably.
It almost looks plasticky.
What's that?
It almost looks sort of plastic looking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's. I'm going to assume that that is tempered glass because, you know, why wouldn't it be? You can't really. It's extremely difficult to break tempered glass. But this is, you know, like the design, like this would be a rather expensive project. Just like with all the curves and all the, you know, sculptural material. I'd be drifting away from Frank Gehry. Well, this is some other, like, you know, architecture from like 80s, 90s. You can see this is concrete sculptural, but this is like a similar, like, you know, this like feature, like having a window turned at this angle. You know, in some respects, I think as a response, or more of like as a reaction against modernism, you know, you would like tilt a window like that because you had always been told you can't. Or maybe it's a little bit interesting. It's honestly, to me, it ends up looking very dated. This is like, to me, like that's like screams 80s, like, you know, Neon and Duran Duran. Not without interesting features. You know, this is an interesting sculptural aspect, but the interior is much nicer. But you can see this, like, you know, yeah, that's definitely 80s furniture. That, like, that chair in the foreground, the violet thing, that's like a really more like a comic. It's like a cartoony version of a chair. But much more interesting inside than outside. I mean, like there, it's like I'm not sure if I would want to go in. It's kind of cool. It's similar in a way to Frank Gehry. It's a bit chaotic. So this idea of like, I don't know. You know, these big, massive sculptural forms, and then, you know, a little bit of like a chaotic, fun. I'm not sure about those dark tiles. So this is Le Corbusier, who was a well-known French modernist. Why is he there? That was, I guess that was meant to show that. Okay. Rem Koolhaas. Look at that. That's so now this is where you know we start to get into you know, similar to Frank Gehry using kind of rough looking materials. There's a type of steel called Core 10 steel that is meant to react to, like, it doesn't have a, it's like it's uncoated, and so it will rust. And so it's meant to just naturally rust in contact with oxygen. And I don't really love Corten steel because I think it's really hard to make it look good. But look at this. I really love the way you have this like massive volume, what looks like this massive volume above sitting over this just glass ground floor. And then there's this elevation. Um,
Is that the same house?
yes, see that silvery curtain. And so I know that someone like Rem Koolhaas likes you know there's a certain, I guess, some people like like something that's imperfect is considered to be at least interesting and sometimes even beautiful. Things that would normally have been covered up or but have been rejected as ugly are embraced as a new kind of beauty. And I don't necessarily agree with it, but this is whoops. That is, it's you don't necessarily have to agree with it to at least try to understand it and be aware that it's like this is what some people are doing. And Zaha Hadid, this is a contemporary art center in Cincinnati. Sort of one of the earlier, like one of her projects that really got her a lot of attention. And I really do like this. Really like, it's a little more consistent in terms of just like the way these volumes seem to work together. Stairways and escalators that are not necessarily, they're not aligned with each other. So like these, kind of crazy diagonals. There. So speaking of Zaha Hadid, you can go to her website. She, as I mentioned, she did die in 2016. Yeah, a little before her time. But like, if you look at like this one, for example, the Gangshu Opera House, which was completed in 2010. Well, I'll go back to photos. So like this is this right here. Whoops. No, stop it. Dang it. Sorry, this dang mouse. What do you think of that space?
That's beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, what about all those, like, I guess, what about all those angles? I mean, some people would try to do something that looks a little bit more rational, and I think that's more about like modernist Mies van der Rohe. Architecture is a rational practice, and someone like Zaha Hadid, Frank Gehry, the attitude seems more to be like, well, it is, but it isn't, or it doesn't have to be. Like you can make a functional building that meets all the requirements of the client, and it can be fun, it can be interesting, it can be sculptural, it can be artistic, and it can be something that delights the user rather than forces the user to obey the building, which is really more like, that's high modernism of Mies van der Rohe and his people like that. You had to use the building the way he designed it, otherwise it wouldn't work. That's also Frank Gehry. I'm sorry, Frank Lloyd Wright. Frank Lloyd Wright was a little bit of a tyrant with his architecture, and the postmodern and more contemporary architects seem to have a much more user-friendly attitude. This image in the center, I love that wall. So this is an example of Zaha Hadid. If you want to look at more of her projects, there she is. Born in Iraq, and she was raised in England. So here, if you look at like interior design, and boy, oh boy, take your pick. Oh, look at this, the Serpentine Sackler Gallery. Da, 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 da. So some of these will be projects that may or may not be finished. Some of them might have been projects that were developed but got canceled for one reason or another. But that's really, does this building make you want to go in there? It does me.
Yes, it does me too.
And that's, the museum up in the Art Museum in Milwaukee has an addition that was designed by the Spanish architect Santiago Calatrava. And that made that museum a destination because it really is more about the space than the actual, like, what it's useful for in terms of exhibiting artwork. And, it has pretty much like one main gallery that's for artwork. And the rest of it is really about the architecture. And it makes people want to go to the building. And that's really valuable. And, they spent a lot of money, they borrowed a lot of money to build it, but I think it was worth it for them. So yeah, I would definitely, it looks like it's attached to an older building that you see in the background. I don't really know much about this project. But yeah, so interesting, fun. These are all things. So here you can read about the project if you so choose. So if Zaha Hadid interests you, go back and check out her website. It's zahahadid.com, pretty easy to remember. And I brought up some other websites of some other folks. David Ajayi, who is Ghanaian British architect. He's pretty well known for his work. He's kind of he's one of the more like dominant stars of architecture these days. So even like some of these Moscow School of Management. That's impressive, isn't it?
It is.
That's crazy.
It looks a little bit, I mean, like there's a Brazilian architect who is a modernist named Oscar Niemeyer, who made similar, like, little rougher looking buildings, but not unlike this. Yeah. And I love the color. Who says you can't use color in architecture? Not him. Ooh, I love that. This is in Beirut, Lebanon. Wow, it's a crazy Escher-like shopping complex. Interesting.
Very cool pattern that the steel makes.
Yeah, I think this, it's something that architects always, can work with, is this idea that like when you have the repetition of elements, like even just like these panels, windows, like the fenestration of the window of a building creates a pattern. And I like the red, and I do like the pattern that sort of like this sort of like almost like step pattern. It just makes the exterior, the surface interesting. And this that it's perforated, it gives it this sort of combination of it's solid and it has depth at the same time. Now I wanted to look a teeny bit at his. So he does design a little bit for Knoll, some furniture. Those are pretty cool. Yeah, so that's David Ajayi. And this is a Dutch designer whose work I like. He designed some furniture, but I think some of his stuff is like really nice. Is this like it's more like industrial design seems to be kind of his thing. Like there's a luminaire in there that would produce light. So it's made of organic cotton fabric, cornstarch plastic ball fitting, copper plated steel arms, nylon screws. Cool. would you say organic? I would say.
Oh yes, very much so.
I would say organic. And here, now this chair, this chair is all right. It's a little bit, it's a little fussy. But I think it's like the printed instructions are meant to stay on it. So here, a functional wooden chair for home, office, meeting, cafe, shop. So it comes as a self-assembly kit. So it's a flat pack. Let's see, how much does it cost? 126 pounds. Couple $100 for something that's designed by Tord Boncha himself. Yeah. Well, for something that comes from an established designer, that's reasonable, considering what he could sell it for. So here, so he does interesting lighting like this. The garland, I think, is quite beautiful. So those are cut metal pieces. Yeah, so there you go. Yeah, really nice. Just these like metal shapes that are combined to produce what looks like a nice big garland hanging down from the light. I mean, that's really more about, I mean, this is more sculptural. It's really more about what you do to your environment with something like this lighting. Yeah, that I don't love. So that's Tord. Marcel Wanders, who is Belgian, I believe. And here in his projects, he's kind of gotten more into like luxury stuff. Yeah, but these are good people to know about. Hmm? And I want to, see. Go back. I'll talk finally about Patricia Orchiola. A chair and ottoman. So, in a way, it's kind of similar to some of what happened in the mid-century with like the womb chair and the coconut chair, where they became more expressive and sculptural, and even like had to like start to take on some meaning as objects. But I think that this is it's an interesting chair. I wonder how, like, if like this would ever become dated the way some furniture becomes. I mean, really, it's a wingback chair, so it's really kind of a contemporary updating of a very old style of chair. Hmm. If you sit, let's see, you sit back, the chair responds tilting gently up to 12 degrees from vertical, reverting to normal when the pressure is removed. So it adjusts to the sitter. I like this is, some of these color combinations are better. This is actually a nice color combination with the blue and the brown. Since that's a complementary pair, brown comes from orange. This looks like it's made of chocolate. I like it. Yeah, it looks like she's looking at like cakes and pastries or something. I like it. It's a nice surface. It is a little odd that it seems like there should be something, there should be more back here, but it's just that that back, this sort of like U shape, just projects way past the seat. But I doubt if it's, I can't imagine that it's not stable. And I like this chair with that wood grain on it, or that table with the wood grain. It's kind of cute, isn't it? That is just a silly little chair. So,
I like it.
I do too. I think it's. I mean, I like seeing sculptural and playful work in furniture. I don't necessarily want it in my home, but it's just really nice to see people working at it. In a way, it kind of reminds me a little bit of some of the '80s furniture, with this kind of like big, um, simple but clearly volumetric forms. And that gigantic knitted chair, like, I think the wood on the base of this red one is nice. And not wild about that. Those little ones are not nearly as interesting. Cool. All right, so that's so I wanted you to see some contemporary designers, and so this is really nice. I do like this like really blocky stuff. It's pretty interesting. All right. I think that is enough. I will put a little bit of the stuff from today on the final, but I hope that you found some of this stuff to be interesting.
Almost all of it was interesting.
Well, good. Of course, I like the subject, and so I think it's all interesting. And, I think it's important, you're going into interior design, and, a class like this will help you to understand what has been done. It's an introduction, so it's, there's no way to get you all the information in one class like this. But, there are like multiple things that you should really like hopefully retain from this. One, that there's a limited range of types of furniture. Every once in a while when there's some new innovation like personal computer, you get a new piece of furniture in your home, or you need some other pieces of furniture to go with it. Televisions were a new thing. Radios, electrical lights, sofas at some point, appeared, going back a couple centuries, and the I guess more like 3 centuries. But they all have a lot of common traits, and a lot of them have a lot of what makes a successful chair is its function as seat furniture. It can look like all kinds of things, but if you can't sit in it, it's not really a functional chair. The stuff that we were looking at tonight, there's like more contemporary stuff. What might even look like a strange idea. When so much has been done already, and you're starting in this field, it can be hard to imagine what new thing could you ever bring to it. I remember feeling that way when I was studying fine arts and learning to make drawings and paintings and etchings. And it's if you think like, well, so much has already been done. What can I do? The one thing that you always will have is yourself, and and I knew this. I learned this about my own practice as an artist, that you don't necessarily have to be an innovator and invent something brand new that the world has never seen. It's perfectly okay to work within traditions and be good at it. And maybe someday, maybe somewhere down the road, you would notice that there's something you want to see or that you think needs to be made, and it just doesn't quite exist. And you get to that point of understanding that there's something missing because you have you get there with experience by learning all about what is there. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
So it's not to say that every one of you will go on and be the next genius in interior design. You might, but that's it doesn't happen for very many people where they become like the one person everybody knows. And to me, as an art, when I was studying art, that wasn't necessarily my goal. I wanted to just be good at it for myself, like for what I want to do. And so a class like this might help you to sort of like help focus on what exactly is it you want to do with interior design. What do you like? There's the nice thing about the field of interior design is there's so many ways to have a career in interior design. So, and I hear from students after they take this class, either later on in the program or after they graduate, they will tell me that when they started working, like a lot of the stuff that you look at in this class, you will see it still out there, and people still use it. There are new, brand new, newly built Queen Anne furniture or Chippendale furniture. People are still making, recycling the idea of that, the Marcel Breuer, steel frame modernist chair. That's, I don't know, we're ever going to get rid, stop using that. So it helps you to know these things because really, like your knowledge helps you, because if you're in a situation where there are you see there's a Tone furniture, and you can say, oh yes, there's some these are some nice Tone pieces. You sound like you know what you're doing, and that's really valuable. It inspires great confidence if you know what you're looking at and you know what it is. So those of you who will take the perspective and rendering class, if you haven't already, hopefully you can use that class and to develop some drawing skill, so that when you're doing design work, you're confident to at least sketch out ideas and work them out, because it's faster and it helps you to think. It's really more like just a way of getting ideas from your head out on paper, out into the world where you can see them and potentially show them to somebody else. It's a lot faster than working digitally. So, and many of you saw my friend Krista Yarbrough a couple weeks ago. And that was kind of cool, right?
Yeah, it was very informative for sure.
Well, she knows how to draw, and she worked at it. And I think she had mentioned that, she wanted to just be an illustrator. She wanted to just draw. She loved drawing interiors, and she developed drawing skills to the point where she can draw when she needs to, and she just has discovered that in a lot of cases, a lot of people don't know how to do it. They never learned it, or they haven't, they just, never really used it. And she said it makes her look like the smartest person in the room when she's in a meeting and they need a drawing, like they need to communicate visually, and she just pulls out a pen and a piece of paper and starts making a drawing. Some people react as if she's doing a magic trick. And it's not, it's a skill, but it's an important one.
Did she already know how to draw stuff before she took your classes?
Not a little bit. She had some experience I think she'd started out as a fine arts major at Illinois State. But the nice thing about linear perspective is that it's a method that you can learn and then use.
I was going to say, it's very mathematical.
Yes.
The perspective especially. So there are rules that apply. So you don't have to be, a super talented artist to be able to learn something like that.
Yes, exactly. If you approach perspective more as if you're a technician, it'll work.
That's good to hear.
There's definitely, you know, style, and there is, you know, it can certainly be used artistically, but for, you know, interior design, it needs to be, you need to use it to communicate. So anyway, that's a little off the subject of the history class, but they go hand, you know, it really all goes together. So any questions before we sign off here?
Nope.
No questions.
No.
Thank you for sharing your knowledge.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm glad to. It's about the easiest thing is to just talk about what I know.
Yeah,
thank
no,
you, Duffy.
I find this very fun because I think that, you know, art, architecture included, is not just, it didn't come out of nowhere. It's always connected and is always a reflection of, you know, certain events in history and things like that. So I
Yes,
think
that's very good.
connecting that aspect together, it, you know, it makes it really, really interesting.
Good. Yeah, you know, if you think about the Baroque and Louis XIV, all that money that was dumped into creating all that gorgeous Baroque furniture and really pushing the ability of, it's like you know, just like pushing the manufacturing to a better and better state. All that had to do, like, you know, you could read about for their foreign policy and their wars and social. It's all connected to all, like, everything else that was happening in France at that time. So without their successful military campaigns, you don't get all that furniture. All right, well, I think that's enough.
Thank you. I'll see you next semester. Maybe, hopefully, sometime in person.
Oh, I know, we're gonna have to
Yeah.
stick online, but hopefully we can get like by mid-semester we can get back to school. But we'll have regular, you know, regular in, like, you know, online stuff like this for the perspective and rendering. We'll have to.
Cool. Looking forward to it.
Good.
Yeah.